Thank you, viewers, for joining us this week on Manamari. Today, we're going to be discussing the political crisis in Ethiopia. There's been a lot of developments this past month, starting with the market boycott, which was announced 2 weeks ago by the Gero youth movement in the Oromia region. On the second day of the boycott, major prisoner release was announced, and about up to 6,000 prisoners were released, including major opposition figures such as Bakala Garba, Olbana Lelisa, and also members of the Ethiopian Muslim Council, Addis Ababa, who were arrested in 2012. Following this, there was an announcement of resignation by the Prime Minister, and his reason for resigning was, quote, that it was vital in the bid to carry out reforms that would lead to sustainable peace and democracy in Ethiopia. In the following day, a state of emergency was announced, suspending the constitution. And the last time the government announced a state of emergency, tens of thousands of people were arrested and a major crackdown followed. We're going to start with Waqo. It seems to be really contradicting actions taken by the government. You know, first they announced this big prisoner release, and the Prime Minister then, oddly enough, steps down, but he says that his reason was that it was to help carry out reforms in the country. And then the state of emergency was announced, suspending the constitution. And then, you know, yesterday we hear about the incident in Dambidolo, and the OFC delegation was prevented from entering Nagamte. So how do you sort of make sense of all these contradictory actions?
I think we should be careful to not look at TPLF as an organization that knows everything. I think all of this, they've been kind of reacting as things happen. So for example, before the state of emergency was announced, there was an interview with the Minister of Communication, Nagari Lencho, on VOA. And just the day before, he was asked, will there be a state of emergency? And he said, no, there's no reason for it, and I've not heard that any such thing will happen. This is a minister plus an MP as well. So you would think someone in this position would know what's going on. But then the very next day, as we all know, the state of emergency was declared. And from what I see, it was a reaction to the fact that this round of market boycotts and strikes affected cities that had previously never had any protest activity. Or even if they did, they were not in the same scale as in other places. For example, Bishofu, Asella, these like financial centers, as well as the outskirts of Finfinne as well. So for whenever TPL feels like these economic targets are vulnerable, they react with the state of emergency. If you remember the Regassa massacre, the reaction to that was widespread protests and attacks on these businesses, industrial zones around Finfinne. And then at that time, the state of emergency was enacted as well. So this is the current trend that I've noticed from TPLF. They kind of use the state of emergency as a reset button to be able to protect these economic centers, make sure that businesses can run smoothly, they can still make their money and all that. But apart from that, you asked yesterday, the OFC delegation got up to Nagamte, got stopped there. I think this just goes in tune with the fact that they react when things happen. They don't really know what to do. This is uncharted territory for them, facing this much opposition from the people, widespread, a unified front against them. They're reacting as things happen. So yesterday they were about to enter Nagamte. I honestly think it happened. It was just suddenly the command post just changed their minds. It was not part of a policy, like a previously decided upon policy. Because even for the past few days, even with the state of emergency, they were going around campaigning and all that. So, I mean, the main thing I'm trying to say is that we shouldn't expect to see any like consistency from TPLF and how it reacts with the protests and everything. We just got to see what they do and act accordingly.
Pretty good response, Waqgari. Micah, so the question was basically, we see a lot of contradictory actions being taken by the government of Ethiopia. First of all, they announced a big prisoner release. Prime Minister stepped down saying that his resignation was important for the bid to carry out reforms. And then following that, immediately, there was a declaration of a state of emergency. And we know that in the last state of emergency, tens of thousands of people were arrested, and there was a major crackdown that followed. So we see, first a step by the government saying that they want to open up the political space for the opposition. And then we see the state of emergency declared. And then where yesterday, the OFC delegation was prevented from entering Nakamte. And with the incident that also happened in Dampitolo, we see a lot of contradictory actions taking place. So how do you make sense of this, basically?
I think this is probably a product of and they had the 17-day meeting, right, prior to that. And I think part of this is probably due to the sort of disparate interests that they had. There are certain factions that had certain priorities. Securitizing is probably TPLF's interest. And so, as probably as part of the concession for releasing the prisoners, this is probably one of the concessions that OPDO and the other groups made. It sort of, despite the fact that there are inconsistencies and contradictions, I feel like this is a reflection of the contradicting priorities that the different groups have. And so you're going to have different factions prioritizing different things. So the TPLF faction is probably more concerned about this than it is about making progress towards democracy, releasing prisoners, and things like that.
Okay. So with the stepping down of the prime minister, so now the biggest decision going on in Sababa and Fufine is to replace the prime minister. So a lot of critics will say that it really doesn't make a difference who is in the prime minister's seat, because the decisions are being made by key figures in the intelligence and military sectors. So do you believe that, first of all, picking the right prime minister will bring change? We're going to start with Waqgari and then go to Micah.
Not the change we want, not the change that we're looking for, but at the same time, having the right prime minister there is going to be important. He's going to be a public figure. And if we have somebody, well, people are saying, okay, the PDO candidate, Dr. Abiy Ahmed, he's having him as prime minister would definitely be better than somebody like Damaka or Warkine and all those people, just for the simple fact that he presents himself as being part of the reform faction. So there's going to be certain expectations from him that even the international media can be like, okay, wait, this is the kind of thing they used to talk about back in their days, but when they were part of the regional government. But then there's been a change when they get into the prime minister position. So for those kind of things, I would say having the right prime minister would be more beneficial. And according to Constitution, he is supposed to be the leader of the armed forces and all that. So we'd be able to call him out for different actions done by the federal government this time. Because before, PDO's excuse was always, is the federal government doing this, that they're going to lose that excuse. Now we can actually say, okay, why aren't you doing this when you have control of the federal government, apparently? So yes, no, I definitely think that having the right person there would definitely be beneficial for the movement, even though it's not going to give us the changes that we're looking for.
I think it does make a difference. I think having someone like Lama would probably make a difference. I think it's sort of, I think ultimately it will be a matter of having someone with, you sort of have to look at their history. I'm not sure I've seen too many other politicians who are resolute, who are defiant enough to be able to confront TPLF or their military generals. So I think in that sense, it makes a difference. You could have a puppet there, or you could have someone who is more interested in sort of having the title more than they are in actually making reforms. And so you have certain personalities who are more interested in status than in stature, I think. So it depends on who it is. I think I'm not sure there's anyone else other than Lama who is likely to make the necessary reforms that would lead to democracy in that country.
Okay. And Wako, you said there that having the prime minister, having the right prime minister would make a difference, but it wouldn't lead to the changes that the people are looking for. So what are the changes that people are looking for, and what would be the next step? I mean, how would having the right prime minister lead to that eventual goal that the people are looking for?
I mean, right now, one of the central demands of the people is that the military has to stop policing people. There needs to be a removal of the military forces from all of the cities so that people can live their lives as they were before. But that's one thing. The prime minister, if we had the right prime minister, these are the kind of things: removing the military from the city, addressing the land issue on the Eastern Oromo border. Well, we've lost, I forgot the count. So many towns, so many cities have fallen into Liu police hands, and it's as if that never happened. It's kind of a forgotten issue. We have about 1 million displaced people in camps. That is kind of a forgotten issue right now too. We just keep on moving. It's as if these people talk about the issues that we're talking about, but the moment we stop talking about it, they stop talking about that too. So hopefully the prime minister will be able to go back, and then the right prime minister will be able to go back and then address all these different issues that we've kind of just moved on from, including bringing figures, leaders, military commanders who have been responsible for killings to justice, bringing President of the Somali region, Abdile, to justice, these kind of things.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of these are roles that Parliament should be playing, and I think these are responsibilities of Parliament. I mean, even approving the state of emergency is something that ultimately Parliament would have to do. But I don't think people have, the representatives there have a sense that that's their duty. I'm not sure they understand the concept of representative democracies there. So there's a sense that the prime minister ultimately decides that there's this tendency to expect the prime minister to ultimately make all these decisions by decree. I mean, which is understandable given that that's sort of how it's been done for a while. But I think it's crucial that representatives actually do their job and represent the people in that sense, which is, I think that's probably the only way to ultimately make sure that we have a democracy that's functional rather than one that sort of serves the interests of whoever's on top.
Yeah, and that's a pretty good point, Micah. And we've seen, like, in the past few days on social media, there's been a charge being led by activists such as Jawahar Mohammed, posting the phone numbers of members of parliament in the Ethiopian parliament, and telling people to call them and have their members of parliament denounce the state of emergency and make the right decision on choosing the next prime minister. So what should the people be doing at this time? I mean, in the country as well as in the diaspora, what should the people be doing? Should we just be sitting around waiting for the government to make the right decision, or is there something else that we should be doing? So we're going to start with Waqgari and then Mike.
I mean, we shouldn't be sitting around, but anything the government has done to this point that we would consider a positive change has been done due to pressure from us, I would say in the diaspora as well in some point, but mainly from the people back home, people going out protesting, keeping on pushing this government, pressuring them to change. So that has to continue. Unless we realize that they have no self-interest in changing for the good, like for implementing the changes that we want to see. It's never going to be for their own interests, only for their self-preservation. If they feel like their existence is being threatened because people are out there protesting, they will make those changes. So definitely that has to continue.
I mean, I totally agree with that. I think ultimately, as he said, as Waqgari said, it's going to be by pressure that you're going to get a lot of these reforms, a lot of these results. Outside of that, you're really not. I mean, I haven't seen any. There hasn't been any incidents where the government decided to make any sort of concessions without being sort of pushed into the corner. So ultimately, we have to. I'm not sure the diaspora has as much of a role other than sort of disseminating information, making sure that those over there have access, the necessary access to information that they need to keep pressuring the government. But outside of that, I think the people over there already seem to understand what their role is, and I think they're going to ultimately decide if they're going to pressure the representatives enough to make these sorts of changes.
Okay. Perfect. So yeah, we've covered the issues that we're gonna talk about for today. I'm just gonna give our panelists first of all a chance to say any last words, and then I'm gonna start with Waqgari and then Micah. Do you see like any change coming from this regime?
I see promising figures within the regime that can be part of a change, but I do not think that this regime is going to bring about the change that we're kind of like hope. I'm seeing a lot of hope being placed in this regime these days. Like people are let me rephrase it. I'm seeing a lot of people kind of seeing Opidio specifically as some sort of pseudo opposition party, but the truth of the matter is the absence of transparency means that we know very little about the people that we're even kind of placing our hope in, even in the leadership of Opidio. What we know about them is what they've chosen to give to us, and we should be careful not to mistake ourselves into thinking that we really know the intention behind their actions. And we shouldn't also fall into the trap of, as I said before, seeing them as some sort of opposition party. They're not. Their interests are still, for the most part, for a lot of them, not all of them, but for a lot of them, still aligned with that of EPRDF as a whole. So for my last message, I'm gonna just say let's be very careful on who we trust, and let's continue pressuring Opidio. Let's not kind of celebrate too early.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think there is a tendency to, what I've noticed recently is supporters online, at least from you can see their comments online, tend to, once they find someone speaking their language, someone that they find appealing, I think there's a tendency to sort of ignore everything else. I think Opidio didn't just all of a sudden, it didn't fall out of the sky. They have a history there, and so there's precedent there for that you need to sort of look back into in order to understand what sorts of things you can expect from them. And so I think I'm more interested in judging individuals, and I think there's certain individuals within the party that I can say I trust, or at least I understand, or I get the sense that they're authentic. That you can expect them to sort of follow through with their promises. And then there are other individuals whose interests and whose loyalties you just can't tell. And so I think that's sort of how I would look at it. I think it's not as useful to look at the entire party and sort of generalize what you can expect from them by just looking at the entire party, because it's really, ultimately it's comprised of individuals, right? And so the right people have to be in the right positions for the right outcomes to take place.
Okay. All right. Well, I would like to thank our viewers for joining us. We've seen a wide variety of thoughts coming from our panel. A lot of hope is in the air. We'd like to hear your thoughts. So join the discussion. Leave a comment. Send us a video of your thoughts, and we'll make sure to post them. Until then, thank you for joining us. I would like to thank Waqgari and Micah again for joining us, and have a great week.